In this video, I want to talk about the Ionian scale. And you might say, well, that's kind of weird. Who talks about the Ionian scale? Exactly. It's in my opinion, it's a little bit of an overlooked topic, which is weird because it's the most common sound, right? The major scale is the most common sound in, at least in Western music. So I'm gonna make the argument that when we study jazz, we sometimes make this mistake of ignoring the Ionian mode in favor of the Lydian scale. We think that, oh, the Lydian scale works better over major 7 chords, which in a way is true, and I'm gonna explain why that is. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't study the Ionian mode as well as a mode. So that's what we're gonna do in this video. So we're gonna play over a major 7 chord. So that's important to understand. What I'm gonna talk about is playing over a major 7 chord. Not just a major chord or a major 6 chord, but a major 7 chord. So let's say I have a major 7 chord. C major scale, Ionian mode. As opposed to the Lydian scale. There are other scales you can play over a C major 7 chord, but I'm gonna focus on the Ionian mode here. So there are 2 funny notes right off the bat in this scale. The F, which is sometimes called or referred to as the avoid tone or the avoid note, and the actual C. It's a little bit funny sounding. So in order for me to explain that, let's play the scale as thirds instead. There, I'm playing the same notes, but in a different order, right? Instead of stepwise, I do what's called an extended arpeggio. 3, 5, 7, 9, 11. That's the funny notes. And 13. The reason that note is weird is because it creates a flat 9 interval from the third. It wants to resolve, it pulls towards the E. Right? Whereas all the other notes can just sit there. Notice also that if I do this, I play a major third, a minor third, major third, minor, minor. So the pattern was broken there. If I instead play Lydian, I get major third, major third, minor third, major third, minor third. That's one of the reasons that it sounds better, basically, the Lydian. If you think of it this way, it does work better with the Lydian sound. If I were to continue, however, again, that pattern is broken there. So major third, minor third, major third, minor third, major third, minor third, minor third. So that C sounds a little bit weird. You could actually play the C sharp there if you really want to stretch things. If I do it like that, it doesn't sound that bad, actually. then you get into Benmonder territory if you play a major 7, flat 9, major 7, sharp 11, flat 9, major 7 chord. There's only one tune that I'm aware of that has that chord in it. It's a Benmonder tune. Another reason why the tonic note is kind of weird is because it creates that minor second interval to the 7th. If I play C major 7 and then a chord and then I play that C note on top, it rubs against that B, right? So that's why you don't want to do that. So that's why it's important to understand that what we're talking about here is playing over a major 7 chord. This is another one of those things that people get confused sometimes. Like if you have a C major chord in a tune, doesn't necessarily mean that you have to play a major 7. Depends on what kind of style of jazz it is. So let's say you play All of Me. It's better to play some kind of C6 chord there. Or even C triad. I don't see why you couldn't. A lot of jazz players, they think that, oh, I can't play triads because it's not jazz. But no, that's a mistake to think like that. Bill Frisell plays triads all the time. So this major 7 sound is actually more of a modern sound. It didn't exist really in earlier jazz. And then if you think about the major 6 chord, you can get into the whole Barry Harris thing with the major 6 diminished scales and all that stuff. It's a little bit outside of the topic of this video, and I've made videos about that, and there are plenty of videos about that if you want to check out that stuff. So that's not what I want to talk about here. I want to talk about the major 7 chord. So let's look at the major mode, the Ionian mode. There are things hiding in that scale. First of all, a pentatonic scale. The E minor pentatonic scale, I prefer to think of it G major, same thing, right? So G major pentatonic. What's so great about this scale is that we got rid of the 2 bad notes, the C and the F. There's all these patterns you can do with the pentatonic scales, right? What I like to do is I like to play, start on the root, even though the root is not in that scale. I start on it to give myself a point of reference. Right? And you can play the E minor 7 arpeggio. Same thing there. If I start on C and then kind of transition into that arpeggio. That's also one of those things that we kind of tend to forget about when we talk about jazz improvisation. That like, oh, don't play the C up here because it clashes with the B, right? Which is true, but not if I play the C down here. So it depends on where you are in the register. The root obviously sounds great if you play it as a bass note, but not if you play it up here. So that's something that I just find that people forget to mention. Don't forget that you can play a pentatonic scale as chords, harmonized chords. So like fourths, right? This could be derived from that scale. They all work over C. Sorry. So you could play the C major pentatonic scale, right? but it wouldn't give you that major 7 note. It would give you the root up here. So let's just take a second and think about the C6 chord instead. Let's say we have that. Let's say we're playing kind of some early jazz style. You know. Now this scale works great. That's something very different from a major 7 chord. If you're playing a tune like All of Me, which starts with a C, as opposed to if you play like a Wayne Shorter tune with a bunch of major 7 chords in it, you have to treat it very differently. Okay, so already we have a pentatonic scale that works to create that major 7 sound, and we have a arpeggio that works. Obviously the C major 7 arpeggio works as well, so we have 2 arpeggios that we can work with. Next would be, I guess, hexatonic scales, which are also known as triad pairing, triad pairs, triad coupling. When we think of triad coupling, we usually think of this. So I'll play a C major 7 again. So you would take, for example, C and D triad. Just go back and forth with those in different inversions. Right? Now this is a Lydian triad coupling. But this is Lydian. That's usually how we think of triad coupling. 2 triads that create that mode, that together they create a 6-note scale, a hexatonic. There could be E minor and D. Okay, it's very similar. It's just that then you get rid of that root. The minor triads have not a strong sound as the major triads, however. Now, if we want to do this with Ionian instead of Lydian, because the Lydian is a no-brainer. You can find the C and the D triad, or the E minor and the D triad. There are other triads as well, the B minor. But with Ionian, it's a little bit different. So the difference here is that I want you to think of the Ionian mode as something that is not static. It's not, when we think of modes, we think of a static sound, but the Ionian mode is something, imagine something that is shifting. What do I mean by that? I mean this. So I'm playing a C major chord, C major 7, to an F major 7 chord. So if you have a situation like that, like for example, My Favorite Things, the vamp in My Favorite Things. You know, then that's an Ionian modal situation. And you might think, well, shouldn't that be considered something else, because a mode is just like one chord or one sound, whereas this is more of a tonal situation. You're playing C major. Yeah, it's I don't know. I think I would still consider this a modal situation. And the scale that would work over that is obviously Ionian. The Lydian wouldn't sound as good. So what makes a key a key? Well, it's this, right? That note pulls to the third, and the 7th note pulls to the tonic. You've combined dominant to a tonic. It's that tritone that gives the whole key its gravity. But if I do this, play that Lydian note, the sharp 11, I'm no longer in that kind of key. I've broken away from it. If you are aware of, what's his name, George Russell's The Lydian Chromatic Concept of Tonal Organization. It's yet another of those books that I'm trying to get my hands on. It's not in sale, it's not in print, and I think I used to have a copy back in the day, or maybe it was something I borrowed or something, but I've definitely seen the book, but I don't have a copy. I would love to have. I'm not an expert on that book, but he makes the argument that the Lydian is actually the root of those notes. The F would be the root of C major, if that makes sense. So I'm not an expert on that, and that's why I would like to have the book and study it some more, and maybe I'll make a video on that in the future. But that's outside. As usual, I digress. What we want to do here, let's just agree that this is a modal situation. You want to find some triad pairs that work over that. So I just happen to have a loop of that recording. So I'm talking about the famous John Coltrane recording with where my Coit-Heiner is jamming over that vamp for a very long time. And if you have this app called Drum Genius, you can find that loop here. It's a loop based on what Elvin Jones is playing there, right? What's great about this too is there's a clave function. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So you can make a little loop for yourself. So this is like that tune, right? My favorite things. So you could just jam, I could jam on that all day. So let's find a couple of triads that could work as triad coupling. E minor, in the C major 7 chord there is the E minor, right? And F, E minor, F, E minor. So I'm getting this from a video I was watching the other day with guitarist Jordan Clements, where he's demonstrating this, and it just hit me that wow, that's interesting, because I never thought of using the F major over C major as a triad coupling. I've always thought of, oh, you can't use it's the avoid note. So the F major triad would actually be the most incorrect triad. But not if you think about it like this. Like imagine, like it's almost like tonic, subdominant, tonic, subdominant, you know? So as chords, of course you could play them as lines too, right? But that wasn't very exciting. What you do want to do though, however, is this. Take 2 of the notes from the triad pair, ing. We can start there. Those 2 notes come from the... Actually, let's start here. That's from the E minor triad. That's from the F. E minor from the F. So I'm playing thirds. this is really interesting because we get this sound. The ear expects this when they hear this. We recognize there's a pattern, and we're used to hearing those kind of if you practice your thirds. So even if you're not a trained musician, if I play this, anybody can hear where that is going, because we all have that ability of pattern recognition, right? Sometimes you want that, to play a pattern like that. But I think we can all agree on that if you do it too much, it's boring. It's boring because it's predictable. That's why this is so great. So here's the third. All of a sudden there's a fourth. So the pattern is still there, but it's not as obvious of a pattern. That's exactly what we want, in my opinion. That's exactly the kind of thing that I'm looking for when I'm practicing, because we need the patterns. Music is basically based on patterns somehow. It's not just randomness. It could be, but most melodies that you like are probably, you could figure out that there's some kind of pattern there. But we don't want the pattern to be too repetitive and too obvious. It needs to have some kind of breaking point. So I'm just gonna play it with these. You can play them as dyads too, right? So I'm just gonna play around with these for a while. I'm gonna use some effects to get some Chord Rosenwinkel vibe going here. Okay, so that was just my Pog 2 to get that sweet Chord Rosenwinkel sound. Let's just find two other triads. We could take the G and A minor, because you could play a G triad over C, right, to create a major 9 sound, which is a great sound. Now this is really weird, actually, because the A minor sounds like the passing chord, the subdominant, in my ears. Like you wanna end on the G triad. If you agree with me that the G sounds like the home, which is really interesting because the A minor creates that C6, right? So that goes to show what a big difference it is between a major 7 kind of situation and the major 6. Those are two entirely different tonal situations. You need to be aware of what's going on, and usually if you're playing early type jazz, like traditional jazz, you want to be more thinking major 6, which again opens the door to the Barry Harris stuff. You can play major 7s in earlier jazz tunes as well, especially in ballads. Like I don't know if that's considered early jazz, but ballads it works. But if you're playing like this kind of stuff, you know, like Django style, then you don't want to play major 7s. You want to play some kind of 6 chord, 6/9 perhaps, or a triad. Let's do the same thing as we just did, like take dyads from those. Let's just focus on that for a while. Now we're getting into kind of guitar, very guitar friendly vocabulary. It sounds like the kind of stuff that everybody's doing these days, the Instagram guitar players, if you will. So don't get me wrong, I love that stuff. Or like we did before. G, A, G, A. There it is. So by now we have quite a few, maybe, hopefully, new things to consider when we're playing over C major, without getting into the Lydian, because that's the mistake, right? I'm gonna stress this some more, that the jazz student learns about the Lydian scale and how it's, in a way, it is a better scale because it doesn't have that avoid note. So they think, oh, I'm gonna play Lydian. Every time I see a C major chord, I'm gonna play Lydian now. Or even more like Lydian sharp 5, like the Lydian augmented. Or some crazy, there are other scales too, like the Lydian sharp 9, you know. So yeah, I mean, I love those scales and you should definitely study that, but it's very, very rare that you play the Lydian sharp 9 mode. If you play music, Ralph, what's his name, Ralph Towner? Oh my god, what's his name? I'm just working on a tune by Ralph Towner, I think that's his name. I hope I'm saying his name right. Where they're kind of ECM label style music, they play those kind of scales. There's a tune called Distant Mountains. I'm gonna make a video of it, and there you were playing the Lydian sharp 9 scale, which is one of the modes of the harmonic minor, right? And we need to look at those scales too, but that's extremely rare. The major scale is super common. And a mistake that a kind of typical jazz students makes, I think, is that they get it that the Lydian scale is a better choice in a way. So now they're playing the Lydian scale every time there's a major 7 chord. So if you play a tune like There Will Never Be Another You, and every time there's a major 7 chord you play a Lydian scale, it's gonna sound like you just graduated from Berkeley. You know what I mean? And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, if you graduated from Berkeley, that's great. But it's bad to be a stereotype. I remember there was a guy coming back to Sweden. He studied at Berkeley and he'd been there for many years, came back. And we were jamming over a standard like that, can't remember which one. And every time there was a major 7 chord, he played like a Lydian augmented, like a major 7 sharp 5 chord. And it's like, yeah, it's a really cool sound. You can do this over major 7 chords. And I'm like, yeah, but it sounds, why do you have to do it every time? That chord and that sound has its place in Herbie Hancock tunes and stuff like that. You can find the Lydian, the major 7 sharp 5 is a thing, but you don't want to sacrifice the major sound, the Ionian sound, in favor of those scales. So I might do a video on those scales as well. Other scales you can use on major 7 chords. So like a part 2 of major 7, if you will. Okay, so I'm gonna leave you with one more concept from this book. So that previous concept was from a Jordan Clemens video. This last concept I'm gonna show you is just like one of the pages in this book, the 3-note voicings and beyond by Randy Vincent. So you could take those 2 chords, those 2 triads. Let's take the G and the A minor, A minor, G, A minor, G, etc. Let's take the top note, the D, and replace it with the top note of an A minor. Then the A minor, the top note, the E, I replace with a note from the other triad, from the opposite triad. So basically the top note is replaced with a note from the opposite triad. So it's a G triad with a C, A minor triad with a D. Now all of a sudden you're creating very different sounds from the same material. Plus it forces you to think. So all these voicings work over C. Because those 2 triads work over C. That's a C triad, so obviously again, you have that pattern, but it's not as obvious as if I were to go something like, you know, it's a more, it's just a less obvious pattern. Okay, so then obviously you could take the middle note and replace that with a note from the triad above or the triad below, and the bottom note you could add a note. There's so much you can do with triad pairs other than just this. So that, don't get me wrong, that thing is cool to do every now and then. But there's so much more. Remember I made a video, some of you might remember a video I made on a Sid Jacobs book, where I talk about adding the note from the opposite triad on top, or on the bottom. So I could take the G triad, for example, and add a note from the other triad below it, so the A, the G triad, add the next note from the A minor, which is the C. So I'm playing the A minor triad here on the D string, and the G triads on the top 3 strings combined. And then you can combine that, you could put that note on top, you could switch the triads. It's like endless. So that Sid Jacobs book is a really good, another good source of information if you want to study triad pairs in a different way. That was my lesson on the Ionian mode. I hope you got some new ideas. Let me know in the comments if it was helpful or confusing, or if you have any questions. And thank you for your time and attention, and I shall see you next time.